Alec Harrison. Since our last meeting, we've set up a few more places to connect with you guys. We are on Meetup. We had just launched a Twitter and a YouTube. This meeting is being recorded by Derek, I believe. Yep, the little recording icon. So if you guys have to duck out early or know anybody that you want to share this presentation with, we are planning on hosting it on that YouTube channel, and it'll be free for everybody to look at and watch. If you want to get in contact with any of us, there is a DL on Meetup. Otherwise, here's information on all of us. If you want to reach out to any one of us, we'll pass it along to the others if for some reason we can't answer your question or think somebody else is better suited for that. So by all means, if you want to reach out to us for anything, just general Azure questions, you want to present, you want to be a part of the organization, any reason at all, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to respond. So far, this is our schedule. Today, we'll be doing the Cloud Adoption Framework presented by Kenny Young. The 10th, we'll be doing Serverless Enterprise Application, which will be by Matt. And then the 15th of December, we are going to be doing an application monitoring with somebody at Sagetti giving that talk. The exact person hasn't quite been nailed down, but the topic and presentation's pretty there. So with that all, I'm going to roll into our introductions for Kenny. So Kenny has successfully managed internal-based teams on multi-million-dollar projects spanning years with Fortune 100, 500, and 1,000 companies. He has over 20 years experience in the field of IT, holding many roles, including BA, developer, sales, startup, manager, director, and principal architect. For the past 10 years, he's been focused on customer delivery for cloud computing, specifically Microsoft Azure and cloud governance. Kenny has been a principal cloud solution architect with Microsoft for the past 5 years. In this role, Kenny is accountable to end-to-end customer cloud deployment. He leads technical and economic value discussions with senior customer executives and drives key decisions and implementation. Kenny is responsible for collaborating with generalists and specialists in the Microsoft field and delivery teams, including partners, services, and product engineers. He has served clients such as Cisco, PayPal, McDonald's, 3M, Johnston Controls, 3M, John Deere, Motorola, and Grant Thornton. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Kenny.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the long intro. I thought it was just going to be posted to a website. So yeah, folks, we're going to go over Cloud Adoption Framework here today. You know, from Microsoft perspective, we are making it required now for all people like ourselves, like myself and Derek. You have to be skilled up in it. What's happened over the number of years is people have gone ahead, they provisioned their environments, and it was really by workload is what I'm seeing. And I spend a lot of my time around CAF operations. You know, I'm an apps and infrastructure CSA. So what I'm seeing is they've gotten to a point where they've got repetitive services, which means repetitive costs. It's come to a point where there's a lot of management involved. And really today, I'm going to go over how to kind of simplify that management through using CAF. Really, Cloud Adoption Framework, what it is, it's a set of best practices, guidelines, templates, tools, things like that, which are all great resources. The problem is, you know, not many of our customers have time to go through 1,300 pages and counting of documentation. So I'm going to scale that back for you here today and make it more prescriptive and show you where to get those resources. So, you know, I'm coming into a lot of companies where a few different ways. They might be on a competitor platform, might only have a couple of, you know, Azure subscriptions, and they're looking to make more investment in Azure. And so we help them come in and build a better foundation, I would say, one that's more scalable, one that's more cost effective, and one that's easier to operationalize and manage. And then obviously we have customers who, you know, have thousands of subscriptions. And even those customers are looking at this now and going, okay, how can we simplify this? What's happened over the years as well is a lot of customers were using subscriptions as application boundaries. And of course, with that, you get a lot of sprawl, you get a lot of waste, and you get a lot of repetitive services. So further ado, the cloud adoption framework. Most customers are coming to us because they want to modernize and transform, obviously, and grow, and then see returns and measure that. So that's all part of the operational piece. This is non-linear. Yeah.
We might just pick up a little feedback there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Hey, Kenny.
Yeah.
Stephanie, are you sharing your screen by chance?
Oh boy. Yeah, that would help, wouldn't it?
Thank you.
Oh, hang on now. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, Stephanie. All right, so there was nothing on the last screen, I don't think. Yeah, just the modernization transform. We'll send out these texts too. I'm sure, Derek, we got a way to get it to the group. I'll have some architectural diagrams for you to take away as well. So as I was saying, it's non-linear. People are in different phases. Sometimes they skip the strategy. I do recommend that. A strategy doesn't have to be a pile of documentation. It's more of, what's your org alignment? How are you going to skill up? What is your way of using the cloud? In other words, you're going to have from company to company different service catalogs. You might support different types of workloads. It might be, your connectivity is going to be a little different based on how you have it set up today. So defining that strategy is more about, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to prioritize project? How are we going to onboard them? I've seen customers where they built forms, because this ties into tagging, and I'll get to that shortly, but think of it as metadata on your assets. So it could be like cost center, the information from your CMDB, like application name, it could be the owner, etc. And some customers have very simple. They send an email where they put in an ITSM ticket, or, I've seen customers now building forms in ServiceNow or SharePoint or whatever it is your tool of choice is, pulling in, that cost center information and basically making that org aligned so that you can run reports on cost management, and you can look across, different subscriptions if you wanted to see all of your dev environments, or you want to see all your QA. And I see a lot in the initial org alignment where folks have more of a dotted line. Maybe they're not mature enough, or they don't have the resources to fulfill an entire team, and they start out by basically, having a center of excellence. And in that case, one piece of advice there on that: don't have too many people. Have one person from each area, one from identity, security, storage, ops, whatever it is you have. Have a sponsor, but only have one person from each area. If not, it turns into a conversation of sidebars and you don't get anywhere. Have them be responsible for their teams and areas, and your goal in that COE is to work off that backlog, and it'll be ever evolving as we have new services and as you expand your footprint. Lastly, we have adoption for CAF. The two main ones today are migrate and innovate. We do have documentation around that. Azure Migrate is now our tool. A lot of people were using Azure Site Recovery. Migrate is really the tool now. It has really become full-blown and replaced ASR as part of that migrate. But we also have things for SAP. We also have for data, and we're working on other ones as well. And then, of course, underlying, you have to be able to operate. So a great way to enforce that we're going to talk about today is through policies and initiatives. Just giving people documentation and to hope that they're going to follow it is not always the best choice. So I'm going to show you some initiatives and policies that can help with that. You can do auditing, you can do denial. The main thing is to make sure you have it documented and work with your line of business owners so they understand what the what the rationale is behind it. And lastly, to manage. So you really got to operationalize. And when I say that, there's two different ways, right? You have application support teams, and you might have infrastructure support teams. So having that type of org alignment becomes very important as well, and how you're going to do it, and how to use, when and how do you utilize Microsoft support versus internal support, things like that. So a couple of the tools that we have here, obviously I'm going to show some third party as well, but showing the tools that make it up to help minimize your risk, increase your compliance, and then of course optimize your process as far as when you go to do monitoring and deployment. So we do have tools like Azure Blueprints, which is comprised of ARM templates, role-based access control, resource group properties, and policies and initiatives. So when we're talking blueprints, those are specific to subscriptions. So let's say if you had, every time you push out or provision a subscription, you want certain things. You want a backup vault. You want to make sure that you have a key vault in place or recovery services. Maybe you have, as part of that, you provision a virtual network that's a spoke that connects back to your hub that is connected to on-premise or a colo. So in doing so, blueprints can really help you with that, to standardize what your subscriptions look like and give resource consistency, as well as working with policies and initiatives. So we'll talk a bit about management groups today, which has a collection of subscriptions, and of course subscription, a collection of resource groups, and then lastly inside those resource groups are your services. So a lot of the customers are using policies more at the management group level, because that way the subscriptions just inherit that. I'm seeing a lot of customers using the role-based access control there as well. So they'll create an Azure Active Directory group or a service principal, apply it at that higher level, and then it's inherited down at the subscription level and beyond. There's also different tools to help you operate, like Azure Advisor, which will give you information back on performance and cost and things like that, reliability. And then, of course, Security Center, to be able to monitor that environment and look for vulnerabilities, ranking from low to high, giving you information on how to rectify or remediate. And then work alongside of Azure Sentinel, which is our SIEM. Many customers using Splunk, totally fine. We've got connectors for that as well. And of course, we want to be able to have, lastly, being able to deploy that through Azure DevOps or Jenkins or Octoploy, whatever it is you want to be able to use there. And of course, we support a lot of third-party tools. Our marketplace is growing all the time. We realize people are multi-cloud, so certainly using something like Terraform, where you can have templates that'll work in multitude of environments, GCP or AWS. And also, if you haven't heard of Ops Compass, they help you manage your policies and compliance across cloud. They do support AWS, GCP, and also Azure. Sorry. So a lot of great tools to support that resource consistency and identity baselines and things like that. So I'm going to show you guys a great way to get started with either internal or for your customers here. It really boils down, how to utilize CAF. In other words, a more prescriptive way to utilize it. So obviously it has some quick start center and some ways to deploy. It just takes you to the wizard in the portal. The one we're going to focus on today is the setup guide. So this is a great way for you or your customers to be able to, it takes you to the cloud option framework. It shows you the organizational of resources. So again, the management groups with a collection of subscriptions, collection of resource groups, and then your resources. Very good way to be able to apply things like policies across a multitude of subscriptions or role-based access control. So a lot of the customers that I'm working with, and I'll attach this as part of the follow-up here, is a starter template for yourselves. And we realize that you may have an existing environment, and in doing so, I'm just going to rename this to we'll call this IT baseline as an example. You would name it for your company. So everybody has a management group root level. As a best practice, don't apply policies, role-based access control. Really try to avoid applying at this level. The reason for it is, if someone comes behind, so I have customers who, they'll have central IT, they take care of internal, back office, accounting, finance, those types of systems, but they may also have a group that sells software, like an independent software vendor as part of the customer's makeup. And, in that case, they may have their own management group and their own subscriptions, their own management. The last thing you want to happen is they go and build that out, and all of a sudden they're inheriting policies or role-based access control that was never intended. So always drop it down one level, create your baseline. And what's nice about this is, think of your baseline as anything that's going to span from production to your shared infrastructure. And by saying that, it could be your cloud ops team, depending on your segregation of duties. It could be applied here. It might be that you have different teams for non-prod and production. In that case, your AD group could be assigned at these levels, but it could also be that you guys have decided as an organization, you know, that you only want East US, West US, maybe some European regions, whatever the case might be. I can now put a policy, and I'll demonstrate that here in a little bit, but I can then put these policies, or an initiative, which is a collection of policies, and do things like, you know what, I don't care what environment, I don't want any public IPs on my virtual machines. It could be that you don't want G series virtual machines. They're costly, you don't need them. It could be things like that. It could be enforcing that, you know, any subnet needs to have a network security group that controls the flow of traffic, especially in the areas of SSH and RDP. In fact, I recommend for any customer, don't have any public IPs. Go through a web application firewall if it is coming from external traffic, and really have that policy. That's one of the core ones I always recommend. And it could be things like, you know, making sure HTTPS is turned on for Azure functions. So as you onboard different things, or you have more services as part of your service catalog that you support, then you can incorporate policies to help manage those. So again, I'll include this, and you'll notice too, policies in this case, and this could be, you know, this in this case could be policies, for example, in blueprints, if you're using both. So you could do it that way as well. And so there's two things with policies and blueprints. They need a place to live, and they are assigned at a location. So a lot of customers take the blueprints and policies, they'll actually store them in its own management group. And the reason for that is, if I go and store it where I assign it, and later on I decide, you know what, that's really not the right place, I need to move this, now I've got to move the location plus the assignment, whereas this way I can keep them centralized and assign them out as needed. And you'll notice in Azure 1.0, we realized that people have infrastructure. Again, I had a customer this year had 1,400 subscriptions, and so what we did was we moved them under what we called our Azure 1.0, not to be misconstrued with classic version. This is just, you call this whatever you want, Azure Legacy, Azure, you know, 2020 or something like that. It's totally up to you. Move your subscriptions under there, and that way you're not being, those aren't being impacted by anything you go to place into your new environment. And that's what most customers are doing right now. They are doing a 2.0. They are moving these over here, letting them live the way they are. They may have a migration plan to move them out of their older subscriptions and into the new environment. But basically what they're doing is setting up, you know, a baseline around this. And then as part of that onboarding, they're making sure things like tags are in place. They're making sure these policies are in place. And it's really hard to retrofit back into existing subscriptions. The example, the public IP, you know, that's going to be a one-by-one, because you're going to have to work with that application owner to say, okay, well, instead of a public IP or a load balancer as the front end, we're putting in, whether it be an appliance like an F5, or, you know, it's some Azure native tools. That could mean changing your DNS endpoints. You know, there's quite a bit to it. There's testing that needs to be involved. So they can either leave them there or have a plan to, or maybe it was a lift and shift in 1.0, and now in 2.0 they're really going to take advantage of PaaS services. So again, just a holding repository until you decide what you're going to do with those. Most of the customers, to be honest, you know how it is, we barely have time to do the projects we have, let alone the projects we need to just modernize. So a lot of customers leave it over here. They may introduce a subset of policies here, and they may have their own role-based access control. But mainly what they do is they set up, we help them set up this new infrastructure with CAF, and then they onboard all their newer workloads in there. So feel free to, folks, to jump in with any questions. I'll pause here and there. I know it's a lot of information, so certainly if you have any questions, you can follow up with Derek and myself. And we can direct you to the right person in Microsoft to be able to perform those sessions, if not ourselves. Naming standards. See two things here coming from customers. Just to give you an idea, folks, I've been working with Azure for, this is working on my 10th year, and I've been doing governance now for the past, I'd say 4 or 5. It used to be called Azure Scaffolding, then it was like Core Enablement. Now it's Azure Enablement, actually, which is a combination of CAF, Cloud Adoption Framework, plus well-architected framework, which I would look at for your application workloads. And lastly, enterprise scale, more for mature customers who are using ARM templates and will build out the environment, much to what I've been showing here. Most of the customers, if they're just getting started and they're not familiar with DevOps, we will do it through the portal. We can export those ARM templates afterwards, but mainly for hands-on learning, we normally start with the portal and then, of course, as they mature, move to ARM or Terraform. So we do have Terraform support for CAF as well. I'll make sure I send out a lot of the high-level links. But I would definitely recommend, the simplest is to use our guidance on naming tagging, but most customers, they'll follow our naming, but they'll definitely customize their tagging, excuse me. So you can see here all the prefixes for all the different things, and then your metadata could be things like application name, approver name that I mentioned earlier. I do see customers as well, sandbox type subscriptions. People just leave their work there, and it is, keeping the meter on for charges. So I see a lot of customers now for their sandbox, especially, they're putting in an end data project, and they have some kind of like logic app or Azure automation, checks the date, 7 days out, it notifies in this case, the approver name, or it could be the owner name, or all of them, or the requester name, because if you're capturing that, and then notify them in 7 days, it'll be deleted. They can come in and change that end date. If not, it is terminated. But again, it's a great practice, especially around sandbox. I wouldn't do this for production. People might forget to update the date and you delete a production workload, but certainly in a sandbox type environment, it's good. And back to the forms I had mentioned, folks are pulling in from their CMDB for application name dropdown. Cost center, they'll pull from the accounting system. So it really depends. A lot of these are more of, obviously it's going to be based if you do have QA and stage, some don't. And then a lot of times with those forms, they're pulling up through AD who the requester is, who's submitting, and saving them quite a bit of time that way. And I've even seen it gone so far as once the form is submitted, it'll go in through there, look up the cost center owner, in one of the workflows I've seen, or it could be the application name owner as an example. But mainly cost center because of budget. It goes to them. They either approve or deny. If they approve, it goes out and provisions the resource group. It would add the Active Directory group to it, which I always recommend. Avoid using named individuals. We do have a 2,000 limit cap, and that's one of the most common ones I see as far as a subscription hard limit being hit, which means then you have to add another subscription or clean it up. And then from there, even look up a subnet, because you are in most of the newer models, we're doing a hub and spoke design, which I'll show here in a bit. And with that, you are allocated a subnet. If you're using PAS, you may not, but now with the use of private link, networks are still applicable even with PAS services, especially if you're wanting to do private addressing to those services and you don't want it open up to the public. A service called Private Link can help with that. Resource tags that we just mentioned, but what I like about this quick start, it navigates you to each of the areas. So if I go to my resource groups here, and I'm just going to pick my subscription, what they look like inside the resource group, I'll point out a couple of things here. One is the tagging. You can see I have in here my app name, cost center, environment. And the second thing that customers often forget as part of provisioning, make sure you turn on a lock. You can still delete. You would have to remove the lock, and then if you're an owner of the resource group or a subscription admin, then you could delete the resource group. It happens more than you think because of naming conventions and environments being similar. I have had customers who have deleted even a production environment by mistake, thinking they were in their non-production environment and by mistake. And to be honest, there's not a lot of services that we can recover for you. Databases, storage, things like that we have backups for, we can, but it's a real pain too. Just so you know, you have to go in and put a ticket for each service you want to restore. It's really not fun. So a couple things to note here. I always recommend the that, you know, when you give access to an application team, have them as contributor or lower. Contributor means they can provision whatever they want inside the resource group, but they can't delete it and they can't add and remove users. So as part of your onboarding, the most successful ones I see is, again, they provision the resource group, they assign the Active Directory group as contributors or lower, because if you have a group that's only virtual machine contributors, use that role. I don't see a lot of custom roles being done. If there are few, it's more to manage. So if you can get away with our built-ins, which we have a ton of them, do that. And then lastly, of course, you know, make sure you got your tagging, make sure you put on a lock, and then other things they can do once they're in there as a contributor, you know, they can do their own cost management and budgets and recommendations and monitoring. So they can do self-service, especially if you have app teams who have their own support teams, which is pretty typical. So we kind of covered the access. You know, less is more, like anything else. I do see a lot of folks still doing named individuals. Again, avoid that. Use groups. Hopefully you've got something in the background that can do self-service, some sort of self-service tool so people can add and remove, so that the tickets aren't coming into your cloud ops team to just be, you know, password resets and adding and removing users to a resource group. So you got to be able to do cost and billing with this as well. This is really where, and I'm not sure if we're going to get to that today, but you know, if you guys want to come back and we could do a session in around that. I mean, today we're going to spend more of our time around management groups and subscriptions and design, but that is here as well. And this is an important part where tagging does come into play and the scoping. So in cost management, I could scope and look at my cost from a higher level, as an example. So I think we need to let one more person in here. Oh, no, they're in. So basically from cost management, I could then, you know, scope at this level and be able to see all of my costs. And that, along with tagging, I could see everything that has cost center 1, 2, 3, 4. Or I could say, show me all of the dev environments, which mainly this is going to pertain to non-production, but or show me, you know, application owner John Smith, and show me all the workloads that John has requested. So there's just tons of stuff you can do if you set up this structure correctly. And then, of course, we've got blueprints, which we're going to get into today. So I'll cover that shortly. Policy, as I mentioned, and security center. So there is a free version. It just gives some recommendations. So really, to get the full effect, you want standard. And then inside, we did do a facelift on Azure Security Center with, it's got a new section called Defender, which rolls up all the different areas, and you can turn on, you know, if you're not using IoT, don't turn it on. VMs and app services, things like that. So I'll just show you that kind of quickly, because I don't think we'll have time to do a deep dive on it. But basically, your Defender coverage here, you can see your advanced protection, and it breaks down by app service, servers, key vault, and then just give you an idea. It gives you a compliancy score, which you'll probably never have at 100%, but you're striving towards it, and it does help you with regulatory compliance. Monitoring and reporting. So Azure Advisor, Azure Monitor. If you look at the dashboard that I have here, this was one that was built through Azure Monitor. So it's for a retail app, and you can see it's very focused on the usage and reliability and responsiveness, but this could easily be something that's specific to networking, or it could even be identity. I mean, it could be anything you want to create within Azure Monitor. You can pin it to a dashboard. And once you have that dashboard, you can edit that. We do have some built-in pieces as well that you can add, but mostly if you're doing a customized operations dashboard, you're going to use Azure Monitor and do it that way. And then also you can share this. You can do access control around it. You can download it, just a JSON file. You could clone it, make it your own. And of course you can do your refresh and other filters. So as an example, you can see just an unlimited number of, not unlimited, but just a ton of stuff that you can certainly filter on within that. And I just want to point out a couple last things here in the monitor, and I'll get into the demo section. Azure Service Health. If you guys haven't seen that, you can go in here and check on the health. It gives more details than our public website. It's more specific to your environment. So you can look up your subscriptions, regions, and things like that, what services. You can see down here, you'll see any root cause analysis that we have as well. So you'll be able to see any issue updates, the rec for that, when the root cause in this case is expected. You can also create support down here and whatnot. Planned maintenance, we do let you know that as well. So let's see, there's 3 that are outside of my filter. There's some SQL maintenance going on. Pretty much the same interface here. Health advisories right here. So we can see some incidents that are outside of my filter for upgrades. So notifications basically, right? Action required, move my Visual Studio Code spaces to GitHub. So things like that that are coming. And also security. Looks like we don't have any today, unfortunately. And health alerts, which is something you can create yourself. So you can come up with the condition that you want or the actions. So I can pick, what my event type is here, what regions I want to scope it at, and action groups. So this is really neat. If you want to tie into your operations, I love this section because it's so flexible in what we can do here. So this is more into your operations. This feeds in from a bunch of different places. Wherever you see creating alerts, chances are it's going to be utilizing an action group. And what I mean by that is you have notification options. I could do it via email, SMS, type actions. So let's say we didn't have a connector that supports your ITSM. You could format an email to send out to it. You can do push notifications to an Azure account email. You could even call. But the one most customers take advantage of these days is really the ITSM connector. So again, if you got ServiceNow, we certainly have it. We don't have it for every single solution, but if we don't, you can also use a webhook, or you could use Logic App as an orchestration tool, and that has hundreds of connectors in it. You can also use Azure Automation if you wanted to as well, and have a runbook to do different things inside of this action group, as an example. So if you had an alert, that let's say you're monitoring, and if a VM, drops or a certain time of day and you want to just turn it off, or maybe it's dev and you only run it for so many times a day, the better way to do it would be to use the shutdown in the virtual machine, but you could do it here if there was some action based on it. And you'll see this a lot in a lot of our tools. The actions and the alert rules are pretty much the same. And I'd recommend too, you can save your alerts. Centralize this stuff. If it's specific to the application, keep it with the app owner. If it's specific to central IT that owns the platform, then I would say, have a resource group that's only for those folks. And you can drop in those alerts and see a history. So certainly centralization is key with any of this stuff. Azure Advisor, as I mentioned, availability, security, performance, cost, gives you some feedback and you can take action on. They do overlap. So you'll see the cost advisor inside cost management. You'll see security stuff show up in Security Center. So they really work together really as a whole here. As far as advisor, I'll just do a quick look. This one here is a cost one. You can see them across the top here. I've got a public IP I didn't delete on purpose from a virtual machine to show this. And it's basically picked up the fact that this is not associated with any Azure resource. I could save $45 if I get rid of it. And if I go in there, I can do a quick fix, which will essentially just delete it. I can postpone or dismiss that as well. And of course, I can look at different ones. Security. This would show up in Security Center as well. Reliability is specific to this area. So you can see here, there's, so what this is for Traffic Manager, which is a DNS load balancer. Not much point in having DNS load balancer if you're only pointing to one endpoint. It really needs 2 or more to be effective. And I don't really have any for performance or operational excellence, but if it did, it would be there. I can change my scope here on the subscriptions and some different filters as well. And then staying current. So we have a number of different areas here, Azure Friday charts, stuff like that. But honestly, probably the best area to go for your training is going to be, let me just get back to the Quick Start Center here, and online course. This will take you out to Microsoft Learn, where you can pick, Azure, what my role is here. I'm going to be, let's see, I'll pick my role as a solutions architect. and maybe I am a beginner and I might want to do a learning path or module, and it'll kind of create that for you. And it does kind of track your points and things like that. The other one that I'll point out as well is Azure with Pluralsight. So if we look at that, we do have a partnership with them as well. You can register and start for free. It's about 200 courses, and down here you can pick your role as well. So some people prefer that. I mean, Pluralsight does an awesome job. I think Microsoft Learn has come quite a ways as well over the past year or two. So that's a huge initiative for us. You know, you can't have cloud consumption without skilled individuals. All right. I'm going to start on policies here now. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So I'm going to start on an overview. In this case, yeah, you pretty much never have 100%. Let me pull up a demo environment here. So again, I'm doing scoping. I can scope this at a management group level for policies as well. I'm going to just get my demo environment here. It's like that. So I'm looking at 2 subscriptions in this case. I could have scoped it up to a management group level as well. This is just your overview page showing what you have, your resources by compliance state as an example. Again, these are policies, things like locations and VM sizes. And in this case now, as I go in here, I can dig into it further. So I'll look at Azure Monitor for actually for VMs here, and you can see this is a collection of policies. It's an initiative up here. So therefore, I have a number of policies. Some of them are compliant, some are not. I have the effect type. There's different types here. There's a deny, there's an audit if not exists, there's a deploy if not exists. So an example of that would be if I deploy a virtual network and I want Network Watcher deployed, it'll automatically do that based on the policy. Network Watcher allows you to interrogate the traffic and send it to your SIM. So I'll do log analytics. It'll show me the resources that are impacted. It'll give me the details as well of what's going on there, why it's non-compliant. And of course, I can go into that resource as well now and see that in more detail. And view the resource itself as well, or I can go directly into the policy to see what that policy is actually doing. And you can see here in the policy, this is really all the properties. You can hand in parameters. So as an example, if I look at, you know, my non-prod here, I might allow for maybe a limited number of regions in non-prod production, but sandbox, I might be saying, you know what, we want to try Germany, you know, because in Azure, not every region has service parity, right? We roll out in certain regions. Germany facing public is fairly new. So in that one, you might have less services. So you might, or it could be the services available, but it's not quite, doesn't have all the features. China is a good example of that. We actually have a separate code base for that one. So even though you might get, you know, Azure Security Center, it may not be the full feature set that you're used to over in North America as an example. So depends on where you are. So let's say I want to try that out. I might, when I do the assignment of that policy, I may have a very limited set here, but I may open it up in Sandbox. So it allows you to use the same policy, hand in different parameters, and of course that's specific to that environment. And then you can see here, I was going to show if, so you can see here, this one is a VM image listed. So these are all the ones. If it's any of these, it reports VMs as non-compliant if it's not listed and the agent's not installed. So that's a good one. It could be a non-compliant VM image. A lot of customers nowadays are building their own image. They take our image gallery, they build their own layer on top, then they save it in their shared images gallery. And then what they do is they take a policy that says you can only use these list of images that our company has devised, as an example. Remediation. So I would say pay attention to this one statement. In here, I can do a remediation inside. So if I want to go out, I don't know if this one's going to have a quick fix, maybe we'll see. So if I had more access, this is our Contoso, but your items would show up here. and it shows a definition of not only the policy here, but in a lot of cases, let me see if I can find a better one here. So in this case, if they did show up, again, it would go back and remediate. It's essentially going to deploy that. I'm trying to find a better one. A good example would be if you are missing tags in a resource group, right? Like let's say you decided, okay, we're going to add a new tag, but now that's missing. You could do a remediation, which is going to go back and add that missing tag. But here's the catch. If you're using DevOps deployments of any kind, you're going to want to take that code that's going to be deployed in the remediation and add it back to your template and redeploy. Because if you do a remediation in the portal, as you can imagine, what's going to happen is you're going to be out of sync. Your template in your DevOps pipeline and what's actually deployed to the portal is going to be basically limited. So I've seen customers who are in full DevOps, they actually don't give any access to the portal except for read access, and everything's done through a service account to be able to do a deployment. So we do have hundreds, I think it's over 400 and counting right now, of the different policies. I've got this scope to my 2 subscriptions. I can see initiatives only if I want to. I can only see policies if I'd like to. And lastly, I can see my customer built in. And if I wanted to look at certain policies, let's say for Security Center as an example, I can just select that and it'll give me all of the items. So if you're not sure what you should start with for a service, that's a great way to do it. So I'm going to look at this initiative here of the definition for monitoring and security center. It's a big one because folks want 2 things. They want to be able to turn it on from free to standard. And number 2, they want to enable that monitoring that's inside of there as well. So you can see there's just a ton of them. There should be 105 in here. And if I were to assign that, you can see there's parameters here. If I go to assign that now, I have to assign it to a scope. This is a built-in, and I'm going to show you how to do customize for yourself. So in this case, let's say that I want this as a baseline, and I don't care if it's a sandbox or non-prod. You can see here I've got my own management group set up. I've got my QIT, that's my baseline under my root, non-prod, prod, and so forth. So in this case, I could say, you know what, I don't care which subscription, turn on Security Center. That's my scope. I might want to do an exclusion. I can do that as well. So I could pick my subscription, and for some reason, let's say my network resource group, I didn't want it turned on. Don't recommend it. So I can do an exclusion. So I'm going to exclude this subscription, this resource group, and save that. I can do numerous exclusions. You might have an example of only network administrators should be creating virtual networks unless maybe it's in a sandbox. And in that case, what you could do is you could have, not allowing for VNets to be created and do an exclusion on that network group as an example. And then only those people with that access to that resource group would be able to do it, and they would get an exception. I can pass in my parameters here. So one thing to note is I could use the same initiative and policy, and then I could change these at assignment time. So I can specify right now I'm assigning, so I could change these. I could also have them in a blueprint so they're grayed out when they're applied, so they're consistent. I'll show that in a little bit. And then if I want to remediate, I can turn that on. It'll go back and go through any of that scope. So when you assign an initiative or policy, remember, it's always going forward, not backwards. So you do need remediation to rectify anything that is out of compliance before. And like I said, if it does impact the deployment, you'll want to update your ARM templates, deploy it, and then of course, the policy would remediate based on your new deployment. So again, remediation is very key to not be out of sync. Use it sparingly. And basically, once I deployed that, it would get assigned, and it kicks in about 5 to 30 minutes, depending on the queue and what's going on, obviously, within Azure that day. So now when I look at, I can create my own initiative as well. So normally what customers are doing is this. We'll start out, just to give you just to go back here to the diagram, you know, we'll start it and say IT baseline as an example here, okay? So I want things that are going to impact everything. I'm going to create an initiative because I want a collection of policies. I got to give it a place to live. Normally what customers do is they'd store it here. I need to add one. I'm going to store it at my baseline. I'm going to give it a name, which is initiative directive. KEYO is my handle at Microsoft, or my email. And I would give it a category. So in my case, let's say my company is Keo, and this one here, I'm going to do an IT baseline as an example. I'm going to give it version 1, and I'm going to go through my policies here. So I'm going to add these definitions. I'll do some common ones here. So I am going to do, first of all, I'm going to do resource group. And I'm going to make sure that I inherit a tag from the resource group in this case. And basically I'll get to the parameters here. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to set that value, and I'm going to set that to cost center. So you'd have to repeat this for tags. Unfortunately, it takes a string, not an array. My next one that I want as a baseline, I do not want, so I'm going to do network interface. Should not have public IPs. I want that. This one does not have a parameter. I may want locations. My allowed locations for resource groups. I'm going to do it at a higher level here. And then from here, I can also create groups. So, you know, picture these as sometimes they do get to be literally can be in the dozens or over 100. So you might want to put in some groups. So as an example, I can create a group here, call this one network. I'm not going to do a subgroup or any data, but I just want to show you how to do this. So I've got a network one. And in this case, I'm going to take my network policies, edit my group, select network. Again, just gives you a way to filter later on. So you can see here I can filter based on that. So if I want to look at all my network stuff inside, what was happening, obviously it gets really easy to sort and filter in here. My initiative could have parameters that I could hand in at the top level. I could do that. So if I wanted to do my location at this level, I could. I'm just going to keep it at this level. And in this case, I can do one of two things here. I can wait and have 0 selected. And wait till assign time, because I may have a different, like I said, maybe my sandbox I allow for more. Or I can just do them right now. You know, I could pick a few of them that I want as an example. And then once I get to here, now I've got my initiative that can be applied. And again, once I create that, it's only created at this point, right? So as I showed before when I did the assignment, which I'll do again here for recap. So what I've done now, I created my custom initiative. I'm saying this is going to be my IT baseline. So it doesn't matter. This is going to apply to everything underneath, except for, of course, over here, because this is at the root level. So just this, you know, it's going to apply at this level. I have one already ready to go here. So I'm just going to do an initiative here, and I'm just going to apply my security center again, just as a recap. So once you go to apply that initiative, same as what I showed you before, right? The exclusions, the scope. So 2 steps. I'm going to create it, and then I'm going to assign it. When I create it, I need a place for it to live. And when I assign it, that's what we call the scope. So whether it's a management group, subscription, I mean, I could go down those 2 levels. So you saw last time I picked the management group, I could also just pick a resource group for an assignment. So I might have a specialty item as an example, and I might pick that to be a resource group, and I could select that as my scope too. So you can go as high as you or as low as you want. Keep in mind, you know, higher is better for ease of management. Think of higher as more centralized. You can also do exemptions, which we saw here earlier. So that would show up inside of here if you did have any exemptions. That was part of what we did when we did the assignment. And I think I went through, yeah, we talked about compliance, remediation. So I think I'm going to move on to blueprints. Any questions on policies or initiatives? All right, so blueprints, just remember initiatives and policies can be applied, at multiple levels. A blueprint is really meant for a subscription blueprint. We do have these samples. So if you're looking to get an idea of what FedRAMP would look like versus ISO, we have those. I'm going to show you a CAF foundation since we're on the CAF topic. And in this case, I'm just going to give a name, Blueprint Keel. I do have to give a location for that. I'm just going to store it at my management group level. And next, my artifacts. This takes a second to load. There we go. So in this case, right, I took a sample. So this would be blank otherwise, but you can see a bunch of them in here. So I'll show you a couple things here for blueprints that are common. One is, like I mentioned earlier, change Security Center from free to standard. Once I have that, I'm going to enable that monitoring through an initiative, which is the one we saw earlier. And at this point, when I create the blueprint, I have an option. I can say, this value is already selected, or I can say this value should be specified when the blueprint's assigned. That's pretty common because you can reuse them then at that point, or in the case of Security Center, you might want them to be identical across subscriptions. So in this case, I'm not going to give that option. And there's 105 parameters in there that you can go through. I can see my virtual machine SKUs. Again, I could set them here, or I can set it at runtime. This is a weird one. You'll notice there's still, a couple of things. This is a drop down when you go to assign as opposed to a text box. Not sure if that's still a work in progress or what, but storage account SKUs, same kind of thing. You can put in those different SKUs. And I'll just go through the different options. So you can see these are policies. You can see this is an ARM template. So they're going to deploy Key Vault and log analytics. Another common one is backups. And then from there, so I can add the artifacts. So I've got my policy, which we saw already. So I could even bring in, my custom initiative as an example. So I've got an initiative here called baseline. I can also then do a role assignment. So again, I would do this more at the management group level, and I'm going to go to that next. You can do it at the subscription level. That's fine. Maybe you have a certain role or Active Directory group that gets assigned at the subscription level, or maybe it's a role that is only specific to this blueprint as an example. You could do that, and you can pick the role. So a contributor over an owner. And then I could assign it at runtime, make it a little bit more flexible. The other thing I can do here is I could do a template, and just bear in mind, this is all API based. Anything you see in our portal, the API is actually built first. So you'll see sometimes, like when policies first came out, you could only provision them through PowerShell or CLI. I don't even know if it's, it must have supported ARM too, but you couldn't do it in the portal. So in a lot of cases, obviously if you're, pretty much everything's exposed to the API. I would not do this, by uploading a template. You have the troubleshoot, deploy it as it is. Blueprints can be a pipeline here as well. And then of course, as far as the template, you also have a parameter. So once I load in the template, it would read it, and I could fill in my parameters here as well. And lastly, resource group properties. I would do this. Your values are really going to change a lot if you're doing it, the way we recommend. This is an option of a way to do it. I would recommend doing this more of enforce the tags at the resource group level. There is a policy for that, and then use our inherit, because nobody's going to remember to go and provision a virtual machine and do, let's say you had 10 tags. Well, you'd have to do 10 for your disks, 10 for maybe for the NIC if you have, and then you're going to do another 10 for the compute itself. So the better option again is make sure your resource groups are done properly, and then use use policy to inherit. So once I have that blueprint, I can go to my definitions. So if it were created here. And I've got my baseline. One thing to note, once I create it, I do have to publish it as well. So it's in draft form. The next step is publish, and then the last step then is to assign that blueprint. So you'll see here I can assign it at one or more subscriptions. I only have access to one, so I can only do one, but so I have my subscription. It has to be more than read-only to apply it. so that's why I'm only seeing one. What location? This does not have any bearing. It's just showing where it's going to reside, like a resource group. It just needs a location for it. It is not where it's stored. You know, it is stored within the blueprint area that we did earlier when we created it in a management group in our case. And I would keep it on system assigned. You don't want to be doing, you want to remove yourself from user assigned as much as possible. And then, of course, here's all my blueprint artifacts. So in this case, it asked me for my org, the region to deploy, which regions does it allow me to build in, as an example here. So this is one that was done at assigned time, not as a default value. And then I have my SKUs here that I could pick. Maybe I want all of them in this case, all my virtual machines. My monitoring and security center in this case was not, if you recall, I did not allow for that value to be changed on runtime for consistency. So you can see all my parameters here are hard coded. So that's where I want consistency across all my subscriptions for security center. And then log analytics and things like that. So basically it was all the items that we have. And then once I do that, I hit the assign button, and then that's when it becomes activated within the next, 5 to 30 minutes or so. And I can see that assignment then. So you can see this one's been assigned to what subscription, where its location, the blueprint name, what version, because I can, on assignment, I could have, 10 different versions. I get to pick which version I want, and then whether or not it succeeded, and I can also then update that assignment or unassign it. And again, it takes about the same amount of time, of 5 to 30 minutes or so, for it to release that blueprint, depending on the queue and how busy it is that day. So let's go up a level, and I apologize. I really should have done this one first. This kind of aligns to what I had mentioned earlier. So in my case, I'm going to add one here now. I'm going to call this, so I am just going to call this policy blueprint, and I'll give it a display name. And I'll just save that out. And while that's working, I'm going to go into my non-prod. So if you do make a mistake, this is one of the areas that's pretty easy. Just remember when you move around a subscription. So if I'm going to move, let's say, oops, I put it in sandbox. Just remember when you do the move, and if I move over production, it is going to inherit anything that is coming down the line to production. So just be careful of that, but you can move. It's pretty simple. You just hit the move here, and then you pick up your new group. So I could move this, at a different level to another management group, etc. And then the other thing I want to note here too is I can go back up. Yours will say root right here. I'm in a preview internal portal. So there's a little hiccup there with that one. But if I want to do assignments and things, you have to go into the details here. So you can see here, I can assign my access control. So I could, as an example, I could add a role assignment here that says, I want a contributor, and it's going to be a user group or service principal. And basically, hopefully I'm looking for a Active Directory group here. And once I assign it now at that key OIT, that right as a contributor is going to be propagated down. I can also see my policies at that level. It just basically takes you into a scope on that case. So I don't have any assignments at the given time right now. I can also go back here and look at cost analysis at that level as well. So again, numerous ways to get in here. If I went down through cost management, and you'll notice here, it is just automatically scoping to my level. If I'm in a resource group and I click on cost analysis, it's going to scope to my resource group. And once I'm in here, I'll just give a quick little one here where your tags come into play. Is going to be, you can see now I have an option down here for tags. And in this case now, let me just change my scope. It's a read, it's an access problem. So I just need to go to my subscription level and select the subscription. And now I'll have more rights. But basically what I could do here is I can add my filter. And in this case, I'm going to do tags. You can also do tags at your subscription level as well. Cost center. And now I can pick my cost center that I'm looking into. And then also I can take this and I want to see my meter subcategories. Let me just delete this. I don't have enough in there. And now I can see my different things, my private link, my SSD and whatnot. And now, I can apply a budget to that, or I can create a new one. So this you could do at the resource group level. I can change that scope. I can add different filters if I wanted to do that cost-centered that I was looking at there before. And I can say, give it a name, of course, if it's monthly, quarterly, annually. And this is a great way to monitor your budgets. Let's see, I got 500. I just got to give it a name. And now what I can do is alert me when I'm at 25%. And then I can send this to the action group. An email. This brings you into the same page we saw before where you could integrate your ITSM in your action groups or email or whatever the case might be. I can also just send to an email. Once I create that, you can see my line. You can see here, we're coming up on November. It's doing predictive analysis here on my cost based on what's there. There's no way to enter, unfortunately, any projects you have from like an Azure calculator today. But you can use it for AWS. It does give you recommendations. You can see your invoices and payment methods, and then reservations. If you haven't looked at that, 1 and 3 year deals giving you a heavy discount. So we have another 30 minutes left. So I think we do have time here. Just as a recap, I am going to go back in here to talk a little bit more about subscription models. A lot of customers do it by workload. You can do it by division. There's a number of different ways to do this. I recommend doing it. I'm just going to skip over these. Here's the assessment you can do as well. If you want to see where you are today, where you want to be, and what you benchmark against others in your industry. I do want to end. There's also an assessment link in your journey for your MVP here. We do have a RACI matrix as well. And again, there's quite a few slides in here. We do have calculators. One thing, I won't go into today, but just a note, you can pull in your own price sheet. If you're an EA admin, reader, or administrator, you can go into our Azure calculator, sign in, and pull up your price sheet as well. There is a migration business case, a backlog that you can use as well. There is the skills readiness plan if you're looking at setting up a center of excellence and things like that. And the landing zone, really, it's just a resource group with all the peripherals. I'm going to show you a little bit more of that. I'm going to skip on these guys. I just want to skip ahead here on the deck. So you can see here on the management group, what this looks like from a structure. Again, some customers do it by region. So, they might have subscriptions based on different areas like Canada versus US versus Europe. And the reason for that might be, like I had a law firm customer this past year, and for them, instead of trying to assign policies that dictate the locations at a resource group level, it was just simpler for them to do. Under production, they had a Canadian subscription, US subscription, European subscription. And what they did there was that they had policies at those levels saying you can only deploy in the US, in these regions, etc. And then they assigned their baseline for production up here. But what that did was, instead of trying to assign a location policy to every single resource group, they just did a separation by subs. So you could do it either or. I think it was, ease of management really came down to it. And then how does this look from a subscription model standpoint when you're trying to optimize? If we look at this spoke, it is a regional sample, but this is kind of aligns to that starter kit. In fact, I'm going to pull in a better diagram here that has a sandbox. So if you look at this, your on-premise connectivity, again, if you're going towards PaaS, people are still using virtual networks with private link for private addressing. The difference between our private link and service endpoints was more like, hey, here's the fastest way to get to that service. Private link gives it an actual private IP address on that subnet. So very, very different in what they do. from that standpoint. So some customers are breaking out their shared services into an identity, a networking, and then an automation subscription. If the teams are small, a lot of customers are just putting it into one subscription. And I've also seen where we had some heavy logging. Like there's customers that were mainly doing like backups to the cloud, mainly due to cost savings. And with that, they had a logging subscription. And the reason was they knew they were going to run out. There's 250 storage accounts per region per subscription. And they were very highly, they had a high density, I believe it was in central US. And so in that case, we actually did a subscription for them just for logging. And there was a whole team around logging. So in that case, it made sense to actually separate. So again, the shared services stuff, but the main thing to take away here is all the central services that IT has, no workloads shall go in here. This is a hub, only your domain controllers should be going in here. You could manage all your blueprints and policies from these subscriptions. So in other words, only give access to those modules inside of here. You're going to want your DNS in here. Web application firewall, that depends. If the application teams are owning their own WAF, then yeah, by all means, have it with the application. But if you're using something like an F5 big IP, there's a lot of license cost. You have to load balance it, things like that. Most customers are centralizing it because of that reason. So it really depends. I've also seen where they have a WAF in their dev test because they're kind of working out what they need. And then when they go to production, the actual ops team takes that over. You'll notice another thing here, there is no connection from the sandbox to on-premise. That is by design. Sandbox, think of this as your requirements gathering, your place to do innovation. And a lot of times customers do not want that access back to on-premise. You know, they can upload mock data sets using something like AZ Copy or Storage Explorer. But then too, you might have less policies. So you may allow your users to create their own VNet. You may allow services that are beyond your service catalog to be opened up. And the reason for this model being used so much is that, you know, I could have multiple hubs in here. When I create a subscription, instead of having to go through and doing connections back to on-premise, I just do a simple VNet peering. It allows me then to traverse the hub to on-premise. It does not allow me to traverse to my production environment and vice versa, unless I did a VNet pairing between the two. And then you got your sandbox disconnected. But it's also lowering the amount of security centers, Azure monitor setups, backup vaults, network watchers. It's really reducing those services. They are consumption-based, so it's debatable how much cost it would save. More of what is saving you is less to administer and manage and care and feed, and more about centralizing. So again, I'll send over this diagram as kind of an example. This is kind of like your, you know, basic starter kit that you can build upon. And then I do have some notes in there on some of the items as well, some best practices. As an example, your account owner, in that case, you know, that is something where an EA administrator provisions the account owner. The account owner can then provision subscriptions. Have that be a service principal. Don't have that to a named individual. You can change the owner, but if they do leave, you will have a gap. So a lot of customers, and then set up your emergency break glass account as well. And what I mean by that, when I'm showing this will be in the deck as well. You can see right here, departments aren't used a whole lot anymore. That was mainly when subscriptions were your cost management boundary. Now you have tagging, resource group scoping. But here's what I'm talking about. So your EA admin provisions the account. This should be a service admin, service principal, I mean, and then basically be able to provision those subscriptions. I got the descriptions in here for you as well. We went through management groups and things. Here's a couple other designs if you're interested. Some people do break them down a little differently, like I was talking about geography. I would tend to switch it a little differently. I would switch the geography down here because that way I can do my baseline for the service consistency, and then I could get more specific with the geos, like in the case I talked about different areas. And here's a simplified one again here, just some things to keep in mind. You know, some people do it by department. You're going to have more sprawl potentially this way, and if you have a centralized team managing it. Now, saying that, I had a customer that I worked with for a number of years. They had 3 different divisions. So they had for IT, they had centralized IT that took care of back office. Those 3 different divisions actually had their own IT groups. And when I say their own IT groups, one of the groups, they had their own domain controllers. They literally had their completely their whole environment was managed by that team. So it really depends on your org. It could be that you're selling products and you want to manage your back office and have those separated. But the main thing is with subscriptions, you know, you should be able to justify why you're creating a subscription. I see a lot where I work with orgs and, you know, their folks are asking for specifically, I need a subscription. Well, I would question that. Maybe they just need a resource group. And I would say 9.9 times out of 10, they just need a resource group. There's very little reason other than even for security concerns that's not valid. It's a lot more, you know, if you're going to do an application or a subscription per application, you're going to be connecting up a lot of virtual networks. You're going to have a lot of those services, and you're going to have a lot of sprawl. So try and centralize as much as you can, and basically, you know, bump up to the limits and then create a new one, or come close. I shouldn't say bump up to the limits. You don't want to be too close. Just some best practices and things in here. That's pretty much it for that piece. We do have a little bit of time. Does anyone have a preference? Normally what I go through next would be maybe take a vote here: cost management, security center, Azure monitor. Any preference in the time allotted we have left? It's really bonus time, so. Okay. Oh,
Quiet group today, so.
I was going to say Azure Monitor. I mean,
because we got the dashboard. I like that. Let me show one more thing before I do. I'll include in the links, there is a project as well that we have, a project template that you can get from the generator, and it does have a lot of your org alignment and basically a plan inside ADO that you can utilize. So there's that, and secondly, if you're not using Teams, one thing that's really neat with this is you could then pull it into Teams. So this is if I look back here, and let me see if I go back here, and of course I go to dashboards. I built a dashboard right here, and of course I could pull that through in Teams. It's just a module that you add here in Teams. So if you need other people working on it who don't want to go into DevOps or the portal, you can just have that right there. Okay, so Azure Monitor. So again, when you look at this dashboard that I have here, this was built through Azure Monitor. So let me just go down here, go to Monitor. So you're going to have obviously different insights for different services. So I'll give you the quick hits here, and we'll open it up for questions. So when you go into your metrics, you can build these, you can pin these, and you can alert on them, and you can scale. We have a lot of pre-built stuff in here for you, and I'll show you that. But the consistent theme here today is scoping, obviously. That's very important, where and when you're going to do it. There we go. Explore my metrics. Okay, so I'm going to select the scope. In this case, I just got my 2 subscriptions. I'm going to do my Contoso. In my case, I'm going to pick a virtual machine. And I'm going to say all the ones in East. So I've got my scope now: Contoso hotels, virtual machines, East US. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the metric. And in my case, I want to see my CPU usage. It's a pretty common one, my percentage, and I'm doing an average. I can change my last time here. I can share this. I can change my chart, of course, to be an area chart if I want to do that. Looks like I can change colors and all that stuff. And you can see here too, here is what I have as far as how I'm splitting it up. I could change that as well if I wanted to. And I can also over here, this is how I can pin it to my dashboard. So I can do it private to an existing one. I can have it shared to an existing one, or I can just create a new dashboard and start a new one like operations, virtual machine operations. And I can create a new alert around this because, you know, if it's probably hitting 90%, excuse me, I probably want to send an alert. So you can see my scope. I could edit that resource as well right here. I'm going to go in and now finish this off. So I'm going to say, in this case, greater than average of 90%. That's what I want you to basically have a condition on. So that's my condition. I'm going to select an email. This is the one we showed before where I can, you know, in this case, I could create a ticket, one that's pre-built here. And then I can also give it a name. And of course, I can save that alert for my history. And I can give it a severity number, especially in the case where I'm creating a ticket. This would go directly into my ITSM if I had that connected. And then once I create that alert rule, that would be activated right away. And basically start sending out alerts, in this case to a ticket. I could have had it go, like I said before, you know, to a webhook if we don't have adapters and stuff for that. So any number of ways I can integrate, whether it be webhooks, Azure automation, whether it's email, SMS, all that good stuff. Service health is what you saw earlier, so I won't go over that again. But that is also part of Monitor. I can also dig into my applications and go a little farther in here. So this is App Insights, mainly used for application, and you can see my failed requests and all of that. I can create an application dashboard out of that, and it detects things like failure and availability and all those things. For virtual machines, it's a little different. In this case, I can go into this retail machine. It's going to map, in this case, what I'm looking at, what my health is, what my machine properties are. I can also over here look at my log events, any alerts I may have associated, so I can investigate those from here as well. So I can take a look at those for more insights. Load some time. Here we go. So I got an alert for VMs in a selected region, and now I can see this one's been resolved. What was it? What was happening here? When it's 10% for any of my VMs as an example. So this was obviously a demo one. And you can see my hierarchy and also my history of that, of what was sent in the change as well. And then I can look at my diagnostics if I had any in this case. So again, very specific to the service itself. And diagnostic settings. So this is different under each service. So if you look at this, you know, depending on what I have, it's going to have a different one. So if I were to, as an example, I'm going to look at QIT, and let's see here, we're going to do my RG. We'll just look at staging as an example here. Oops, no results. There we go. So I can look at any number of these things, like a database as an example. And you can see here, it's different for each service, right? So if I look at this, this is what my options are. And then I can turn these on. The log is specific to the service, obviously, and so are some of the metrics. But what is consistent is my destination. So my log analytics, obviously, where that's pulled up through a number of different areas, but that's where I could centralize my logging. I could archive for 99 years inside of storage if I wanted to, by picking a storage account, and I can pick my retention here as well. So, you know, our activity logs are only 90 days. I believe that's still the case. So you might want to put it in storage, or I can stream it to Event Hub where it could be picked up by my SIM. So there's lots of different diagnostic settings in here. If I look at my virtual machines as an example, case, I'm just going to pick my subscription. I'm going to go into mine. And in this case, I'll look down at my diagnostic settings. And in this case, the machine must not be running. But here's the different ones that I have. So I can configure like my performance counter, my logs, my crash dumps, things like that. And then, of course, that could go with my login links. So it's up to you how much you want to capture. Let's see here. Data collection rules, you can do that for virtual machines. So if you want to create a rule, that's an overall one. You can add your virtual machines that you have. You can specify what you want to collect and deliver for a data source. This case, I could do performance counters and pick those. I could do event logs. I could do syslog for Linux as well. And then I get to pick my destination like we saw before. So it's only Azure Monitor, in this case, the monitor logs, but I do get to select my workspace. So again, centralize your workspace if there is a centralized team managing it. If not, it could be with the app. And auto scaling. So depending on what I might want to do here, you can see I don't have auto scale configured. I can do this under monitor. I could do it under the service as well. There normally would be, let me go back here and pick another subscription. So auto scale. Huh. My apologies. All right, you have to use your imagination on this one. It would show up over here with auto scaling. You would click that, and then what you can do is from there basically specify, like, you know, if it's running hot, you know, scale it one node as an example. It'll also show you your run history. You can do a notify when the scale is enabled, and of course you can have your diagnostic settings. Not sure why that didn't show up. Yeah, my apologies on that one. And then your private link scopes, you can also monitor that as well. And you can do Azure Monitor for those private links as well, if you want to do that. Once you create it, then you can add it and start doing the monitoring. You do have to create this one first. It's not part of the initial setup. We kind of already talked about these usage and estimated costs. So that brings us with about 7 minutes left. While we open it up the last few minutes here, you know, if you have any specific questions, and then we can call it a wrap. I know it's a lot of information, so one thing I will say is for most customers, we go through this as, like, I call this like the shotgun blast or the fire hose session, and then we have follow-on sessions where you actually get hands-on, because as architects, you know, we're not consultants, so we'll do guided, but we need somebody hands-on keyboard. But we'll actually help you go through and, you know, set up the management groups, discuss your specific environment, and then take those base templates and create those for you. So I will open it up to questions now, or if you have certain scenarios that you want to go through. Derek and team, do you guys have any questions or comments?
I know on the CAF stuff, so I've been through this so many times.
It's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm still digesting a lot of it. So just to reiterate, the breakdown Microsoft is now suggesting is not at a subscription level for department and costs. It is at a resource group level.
Yeah, mostly. Well, it depends on the model, but yes, most times now, I mean, because you want to get more granular, and the way to do that is to go down, because really, you know, your resource group is your logical container for your workloads. Therefore, you're probably going to want to do cost management and things like that at that level. You can still do cost management, though, or scoping at the subscription and management group level. This just gives you a flexible structure to go up and down the scope.
Okay.
Yep. More options, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've seen it done both ways. I've seen people use a subscription as a billing boundary, a billing container. The problem you have to be careful of, you start getting subscription sprawl, then it becomes very difficult to manage things like access and stuff to them.
Exactly. And that's the big problem. And that's why people are coming to us now. They want to do a new fresh start. What most customers are calling Azure 2.0, which really that's ARM, you know, Azure Resource Manager was our 2.0, but they mean Azure 2.0 for them as a customer.
Sure.
Any other questions, guys?
Is there any tips you guys have if you're in a role of doing this, or I think you showed some free tools out there for just like getting started if you're new in an Azure role, but as far as CAF, if you need to, I don't know, position your organization to start utilizing it, or consultant or as an employee, you just need to get caught up on what best practices it is. Like you said, it's huge. Is there a this is where you should start area, or what would you guys' recommendations
The
be?
setup guide. That's probably the most prescriptive way to go through CAF. And it kind of gives you all those pillars. And the other thing to note if you're selling to your org is management groups, policies, blueprints. Most of the stuff I showed today is of no cost. You know, obviously Azure Monitor is because you're using storage, right, for those. But the rest of it really doesn't have any charge to it. Neither does the training. I would say Pluralsight is a good one. Azure Learn, Microsoft Learn. And then for prescriptive guidance on how to do this would be the setup guide. And of course, you know, reach out to your Microsoft person too if you need help with the implementation. We do a lot of these for customers.
Sure. And then the other end goal is once you organize a lot of these, you'll save money too, is another sell, right?
Yeah.
If you organize things. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, because you're not repeating services. And then I would say as important as cost, you're just not having to manage as much.
Okay, cool. Is there any other questions?
I had one mention. I was on my, we did a cycling trip a week and a half ago. I finally did the Mississippi Trail. I don't know, what was it called? Mississippi Trail. You know, it's where you come down the Mississippi River. So I went from the border of, you know, top of Minnesota down to, I don't know if you guys know where Marquette or McGregor is in Iowa, but I stayed at the Pikes Peak Park. What a beautiful side coming down that river. You guys really have a beautiful spot there. I know you guys are close to it, but
side is really nice.
Yeah, hilly, but nice.
Some good caves over there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got to the town McGregor, and we find out we had a 3-mile climb to get up to our campsite that night. But other than that, it was really neat. Well, thank you so much, folks, for your time. You know, if you got any questions for us, just let us know. And other than that, I really appreciate the time and chance to present. And hopefully this was helpful for you guys.
Thanks, we appreciate it, Kenny.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right, take care, folks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.